I look at the employee, I click on this particular UI, and I am able to see what are the competencies, and I can just simply check what is the gap. And it automatically generates the learning, and it gets pumped to my learning system where it gets added. Now, practically what's happening is, I am generating this data time and again, where I did this CG exercise on one single employee 4 times throughout an year, and I am able to actually see the learning curve, how it's happening. This is another aspect of learning, directional learning, which it is coming from the manager side rather than the employee side. So I was talking about employee sees what's in it for me. He sees the interest level. He sees from a learning graph perspective or a career path perspective that I've done this, so it gives me a catalyst, I will do that. At the same time, manager is pushing something, and that particular employee is taking it because manager is actually putting it out as an improvement criteria. So this is something which is basically coming from the manager, which I think the managers are the custodians for it, and they cannot be blaming HR for that. However, it is the duty of the HR from a framework perspective that they built this together. They are, I would say basically HR can only be an enabler in bringing the competency framework, but the drive probably can be coming from their side, which in the end basically together from a collaboration perspective can be firmed out. And then these kind of data basically can be captured. So if you look at it, what I can actually take out from this is, from a 6 monthly data, I can look at what is the most common learning gap and why that particular gap is happening. And I can straight away pinpoint and say, I do not have this particular learning in my organization, or this particular learning is scarce in this particular region. So let me probably develop a great learning instructional-led course to be able to fulfill this particular gap. Yeah. This is the first topic that I was talking about, which I actually put it to the end, which can make it a summary that if you look at it, training plan, training history, tools, not solutions, probably does not increase in employee productivity. So 90% of the employees of the companies basically, from an LMS perspective, it is just being used as a registering as a course and tracking learner history, which is not where we are in terms of directional learning. I think we are miles ahead of that. However, our organizations probably might be still using it in this particular process on an aspect. And 50% of these scores, if you look at it, actually this is something which is a very interesting statistics. Courses booked and tracked are not relevant for the learner. And what happens is, because of that, organization pays for an expensive LMS, spends on the course provider for course delivery, and lastly loses productive time of its employees who attended the course. So you could actually look at it from your team's perspective. If 5 people are reporting to you or 10 people are reporting to you, how many of them attended such kind of courses which did not make sense for their respective jobs? And can you imagine the kind of money that is being wasted? We're only looking at $5,000 for a course, but imagine the kind of time that the employee invested in taking that particular course, which is part of the salary component of that particular employee. And look at it from a perspective, what is the investment that the companies are making. And so it's very simple actually that before selecting a LMS system, before letting the employees choose a learning, we should be able to decide how and when, which type of learning is going to be cascaded to the employee and how it is going to be measured by the manager. So we are actually again coming back to this. I'm talking to you like a teacher, but I feel basically that I can give the message across, which I feel probably will be very precious for, I would say basically in your respective L&D departments. Am I able to measure the productivity, and is it a manageable or a useful result that is coming out of it? If it is not coming out of it, there is something that is missing in my learning framework, which I have to go and revisit using these fundamental elements. I think I am towards the, I think this is a summary, basically letting the learner learn their own way to spike user adoption, making sure learning is aligned to organization need, and measuring learning ROI. So the takeaway basically of this session, I would say, is that make sure that we are measuring the learning return on investment by measuring the learning output, making sure that the entire learning framework is aligned to the job that the employee is doing, and at the same time we are giving that particular learning to the employee in a fashion that it interests their attention. And so we basically try out different ways to do it. Of course, gamification is one aspect of it, but I think gamification is probably like big data today. where it is used too many times, but in the end, not many of us basically would know how to implement it. Because of course, it is a very advanced way of doing it, and I don't think we are in a state where each one of our companies, basically organizations, can actually implement a gamified learning system. I think probably we are about 5 years behind, and honestly speaking, it might not make a lot of difference if we implement a gamified system, rather concentrate on this aspect which actually will make a difference. So you will be able to, so this is basically an indirect, subtle gamification concept, but in the end, if we are able to follow this, it will result into which courses are getting the maximum likes. When I'm basically feeding a directional learning out of interest-based analysis, which courses with maximum followers, which courses with maximum reviews, which courses with maximum enrollments. So this is some of the data actually from an absolute learning perspective, which could drive that particular aspect of it, which is again, one single aspect from an employee-driven learning. I think I will skip this slide. I have basically used this from a overall perspective of how employees and managers basically can instill and prepare a business case for the decision makers to be able to have a learning framework, which I think each one of you already know it and believe in it, that learning is something which is there to stay, and we need to basically have the best possible futuristic next generation learning framework for our organizations. I am done with my session, and I am absolutely honored if you have a few questions which I can answer.
Questions for Manu? While you're thinking of a question to ask, I have one. You mentioned a learning performance index, or learning productivity index.
Yes.
What is that? Is that a numerator divided by a denominator? What is
yes,
that?
I would say the learning output would be when a manager is rating the employee's productivity by the performance criteria, which is tied to his job, and what an employee is rating himself or herself when they are actually doing the learning. So when I am going and doing the learning, I will rate myself, and my manager I will rate it probably from a perspective how much I learned, which is the biggest problem, because how much I learned is not what my organization wants. My organization wants how much I applied. And my manager will always be able to only look at, he will not look at the learning event, he will look at the performance criteria which is mapped to the job. So what was the output? So that probably will be the learning index, which can actually be a real data point for us to be able to see whether the learning framework in my organization is working or not.